We told you in the last segment about the Marxist group Free Press and how closely it's been working with this administration. One of the issues they've been closely working together on with the FCC has been the fight to control the internet through something called net neutrality. Glenn and a guest explain.
So it's actually about three things, okay? First one is access. Can we play the president here and shot number one?
I will take a backseat to no one in my commitment to network neutrality.
He believes in it, and it's all about access. What do you mean by that?
Well, they want to guarantee that everyone has access to broadband internet, and that means they want to turn it into something of an entitlement. They want to ensure that everyone has it, that they subsidize it. There's $7.2 billion of stimulus funding that goes toward building out broadband, subsidizing it, and so on.
All right, so give me Van Jones, please, on net neutrality.
It does no good to win on net neutrality if net neutrality winds up having a neutral impact on the lives of the people. I would argue that fighting not just at the FCC, as important as that is, but fighting to make sure that every local city and municipality is making free broadband available to everybody has to be number one on our agenda. It has to be.
Number one on the agenda. Wow. By the way, Free Press was so proud that we were going to help them get publicity this week that clip that you just saw, which we grabbed a while ago, yeah, it's too bad we have archives here. They've scrubbed that now from their website, but that's sure, they're proud of that. Why is Van Jones involved? Why does he think this is so great?
Well, Van Jones was a Free Press board member until he went into the administration. Van Jones has been praised by many of these radical left-wing groups, as you know, and he was speaking there at a Free Press event. We had the logo there in the background. And I think the reason they took it down from their website is right now they're trying to act like they're the good guys. We're stopping these bad phone and cable companies. We're going to keep everything fair and neutral.
So the third one here, we have social justice, and the third one is controlling content. And I think this is what most people are worried about. What does this mean to me? I mean, you get on, you read different news, alternative news sites. I mean, they're the ones, really, the internet, YouTube, blogs, just being able to share ideas. It's the place where we are more free than probably we've ever been before.
Absolutely. Look, the short-term impact of these types of regulations will just be that the internet won't work as well because you won't have as much competition, you won't have as much investment, they won't be able to manage the network, things will load slowly, you'll have a more difficult time. The long-term implication is much, much more sinister because all of these folks up there on the board and all these people we've talked about want the internet to be owned and controlled by government. And when they put regulations in that destroy private investment, they'll step in and they'll put government investment in, taxpayer dollars in. They've already got $7.2 billion from the stimulus, and they said, and Susan Crawford told the Wall Street Journal that that's just the down payment.
Still to come, how Richard Nixon went about silencing his opponents and the scary similarities to what's happening today. Let's take a look at what we've learned so far this hour. We've learned that it is this administration's agenda and the progressive agenda to silence the opposition and control the message. We saw it happen with the shutout of Fox News.
It's really not news. It's pushing a point of view.
The president looks at it, and we look at it, is it's not a news organization.
We've learned that the president sees information as a, quote, distraction and as something that puts, quote, pressure on the democracy.
Information becomes a distraction, a diversion, a form of entertainment, rather than a tool of empowerment.
We learned about attempts to control the message in other White Houses, like Woodrow Wilson's administration, with its propaganda-spewing Committee on Public Information.
By and large, the journalists that were out there complied with the official CPI guidelines in order to stay inside the information loop, because the journalists had a decision to make. Do we do what the Public Information Office is telling us, or do we get cut off?
We learned about the man Glenn calls the most dangerous man in America, Cass Sunstein.
He proposed that, 1, the government ban conspiracy theories. Ban them. Make them illegal. I mean, that sounds like a conspiracy theory in itself. Number 2, the government might impose some sort of tax on those who engage in conspiracy theories.
We learned about the president's FCC diversity czar, who wants white people to step down so someone else can have power and thinks the fairness doctrine doesn't go far enough.
Put some hard structural rules in place that are going to result in fairness.
We've learned that the SEC is exempting itself from having to disclose information that Americans have the right to obtain under the Freedom of Information Act.
The law exempts the SEC from providing information derived from, quote, surveillance, risk assessments, or other regulatory and oversight activities. Wow, that's kind of broad, huh?
We learned about the Marxist leader of the group Free Press that works hand in hand with this White House, with Robert McChesney, who wants to dismantle capitalism brick by brick.
McChesney, in his own words, any serious effort to reform the media system would have to necessarily be part of a revolutionary program to overthrow the capitalist system itself.
And we've learned about the Free Press and the FCC fight to control the internet through net neutrality.
We are now fighting with some very prominent internet service providers.
One more important history lesson is next in tonight's Crash Course. Tomorrow night on this program, the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. joins us for a special hour on civil rights and the rights of man. Make sure to set your DVRs for that. Tonight, we're talking about this administration's blatant control of the message and attempts to silence many of its critics. Before we leave you, here's just a reminder of where this country has gone before and why we must protect the liberties that each and every one of us are entitled to as Americans.
My fights with the media, of course, are legendary. It goes back a long time. The media and I are not friends. It is not personal.
In the 1970s, America had a lot of enemies to be concerned about. We were fighting a war in Vietnam, and the Cold War was in full swing with the Soviet Union. But to the 37th President of the United States, there were also very serious enemies to worry about on the home front.
Hello?
Yes, sir. Or excuse me, Mr. President. Hi, Mr. Haldeman. Do you want him to wait?
No, I'm on. There would be no interviews with the New York Times under any circumstances to do in the Pentagon Papers. And no man from the Times will ever be in my office as long as I am president. That order is on, and it is final. The same is true of Time, and the same is true of Newsweek. Is that clear? Yep. Hello?
Mr. Ziegler, sir.
Hi, Ron. Yes, Mr. President. I want it clearly understood that from now on, ever, no reporter from the Washington Post is ever to be in the White House. Is that clear? Absolutely. Is that clear? Yes, sir. None ever to be in. Now, that is a total order, and if necessary, I'll fire you.
It was the worst of times.
Don't get the impression that you arouse my anger.
I have that impression.
You see, one can only be angry with those he respects.
It was a time when the President of the United States cast a dark cloud over the nation, stifling free speech and abusing the same powers that the American people had granted him. If the media, liberals, or others dared to question him or his administration, well, they were branded an enemy and they were punished. The quote enemies were revealed on June 27, 1973, at a Watergate hearing on Capitol Hill. Former White House counsel John Dean turned over a series of documents detailing the methodical plot to, quote, use the available federal machinery to screw our enemies. On the list weren't just members of the press. They were politicians, union bosses, businessmen, even celebrities like Paul Newman, Barbra Streisand, Carol Channing, and Joe Namath. Former CBS chief Watergate correspondent Dan Shore was covering the story that day when he unexpectedly found himself part of the story.
I was outside the Senate caucus room on live on camera on CBS, and I went down the list one by one, and number 17 is Daniel Shore, a real media enemy, it says here. And I really felt as though I was going to collapse.
You take a poll on Dan Shore, he's always promoting something, isn't he? He incidentally is on, shouldn't get involved in this, but he's on our tax list too.
There were stories that I did and commentaries that I did that did not agree and did not sit well with the president.
Fellow newsman Marvin Kalb was also on one of Nixon's hit lists.
I found out that I was on the enemy's list, and I was shocked, absolutely shocked, and I must say totally appalled. Paul Newman, the actor, an enemy? Absurd. Marvin Kalb, Dan Shore, absurd. I understood that Richard Nixon had a problem with my reporting about the Vietnam War. It clearly was in his mind that I was some kind of a problem to him.
At one point, Nixon gave orders to call J. Edgar Hoover, get the FBI to get something on me.
He was examining my income tax. Nothing was ever found to be wrong. Criticism is perfectly acceptable in a free and open society. It doesn't matter whether Nixon is president or Obama is president. In an open, free society, the greatest guarantor of freedom is a free press.
It's almost 4 decades and 7 presidents later. But have times changed?
Defending freedom. Good night, America.